All right, guys, I think we're finally getting this to work. We had a few technical problems here just getting started, so hopefully this is going to work a little bit better. And we're back, hopefully, on our regular schedule here, so I'm fairly optimistic that that's going to work the way it should. And just a real quick update on a couple different things that we do. This is an Ask Me Anything show, so you can ask me whatever questions you have. Just try to remember to hit the @We the Governed in your question. Just say @We the Governed, so it's a little bit easier for me to spot the questions. The last couple series of these that we've done this week, there were so many questions that I was actually had a hard time keeping track of the questions and trying to basically pick them out of the commentary that was going back and forth between everybody. And that's fine if you want to make comments in the question section, but in order for me to spot them as I go along and then kind of highlight them, then I'm going to need to be able to actually see the questions that you have so that I can actually put them up here on the screen below. We're trying a couple different things here technically at the live stream, so I'm just getting used to a new setup here, so hopefully this will work out okay. Like I said, I have 2 videos that we recorded this week. Last week I'd only done one, but we actually got 2 recorded, and they're going to come out over the next couple days. The first one's going to be a video about Chris Reichdel's direction. He's the head of OSPI, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and his basic direction, telling all the school districts that they don't have to worry about following the transparency laws, which of course is absurd and ridiculous, particularly considering that this is coming from the guy who emphasized and abused the law as much as possible during the COVID lockdown theater, and his effort to destroy as many kids' potential future education as he could in an effort threatening school districts, threatening with taking away their money, firing teachers, threatening teachers. It was this perpetual kind of vicious, nasty cycle that was led directly by Chris Reichtel and enforcing the law, supposedly. And now that there's a law he doesn't like, and now he's just saying you can ignore the law, and parental transparency is not a priority. So anyway, this is likely to lead to some more outcomes moving forward that'll be interesting to see where it goes. But I did a whole video on it. It's worth, I like that video. The second video I did is about Bob Ferguson, common topic of a lot of my videos lately, because I promised you that I would be doing a lot of videos about him. And this video is going to be about the pay-to-play scheme that is done through the Attorney General's office with their SAG contracts, and how they conveniently seem to line up with a lot of his campaign contributions. So if you pay to play with the AG's office, a few campaign contributions along the way, it's not a bad way to get millions of dollars of contracts from the AG's office. And it looks like, unfortunately, there's quite a bit of evidence that would indicate that that's been the way he's been running that office for quite a few years. It's easy to forget he's been there for 12 years as Attorney General. And so, while it's not unusual to have outside legal contracts, it is unusual to see the volume of these types of contracts and how they closely align with his contribution base and his campaign finance reports. In that, conveniently, the people who happen to get the money from the Attorney General's office for their contracts, how suddenly those are the same guys who, of course, are contributing to Bob Ferguson's election campaigns. Anyway, there's more to it. I just scratched the surface of the video that I put out today, but it's a topic that I don't think has been discussed in our state at all. It was first brought to my attention a couple years ago by other attorneys, but this was a number of years ago, and I wasn't as familiar with some of the campaign finance research tools that exist, and also I was a little less familiar with the sheer volume that's been uncovered lately. So it's a good story. It's actually probably going to be a multiple series part stories, but at least it kind of gets that story down the road. The video that I wanted to get into right now was that I just didn't get, I didn't have enough time to prep up today, which had to do with those 3 kids in Spokane that are having the book thrown at them for committing the great and terrible crime of actually using rental scooters to put skid marks on a trans flag that the geniuses out in Spokane put on the ground on the road. Yeah, just amazing. People will drive over a sign that's painted on the road, and how dare they leave a skid mark on it. And so, well, the Spokane prosecutor lets murderers, rapists, and shoplifters and violent assault and all these other minors who are committing those types of crimes, let them off with scot-free, they're going to throw the book at a couple of kids that put skid marks on a stupid sign flag that was painted on the ground. So, and not even an American flag, right, but just some kind of a weird trans flag that somebody thought was super important, highest priority of all, to put that on the ground. Anyway, I don't know if they're just trying to mock the legal system in Spokane, and the people who are involved in it are just using the stupidest examples that they can to demonstrate just how insane they are. But regardless, it's definitely, that's a story that needs to be told. I know it's been covered in a variety of national news stories, but there's a little bit more local focus on this I'd like to have. So I wasn't able to get that video done today, but I'll see if I can get it done before too long. So once again, ask me anything, and I'm going to try to stick to these Tuesdays if I can. A real quick report, too, that I didn't really get to. It was after my last live stream, and I only did one video last week on top of that. But there were a couple court cases that I attended in Thurston County Superior Court last Friday. Unusually, it wasn't a time when I'm suing anybody or being sued by anybody. It was actually, I just attended to observe a couple court cases. One of them was the pushback against the impact statements that the Attorney General's office is trying to put on these 3 initiatives coming up in November. And remember, of course, big government's always going to try to find any excuse they possibly can find to push back against tax cuts, right? Any kind of a piece of legislation that's a tax cut. And the campaign has been run by Let's Go Washington for the 3 of the 6 initiatives that are going to be in this November's ballot. The other, remember, 3 of them were passed by the legislature about a couple months ago, 3 months ago now. But 3 of them are going to be on the ballot coming up. And it's a simple campaign, vote yes, pay less. Obviously, each of these 3 initiatives will cut your cost of living one way or the other. And the people who grift off your tax dollars and who want to steal as much of that money as they can for their own grant grifting operations and self-profit programs that they run through the government, they, of course, are super angry that voters in Washington State who have a history of approving these tax cuts, that they're even going to have the opportunity to actually look at some of them coming up here in November. So one of the ways that the Attorney General's office tries to put their finger on the scale for the voter is to put a little impact statement before each vote or each initiative that's going to talk about cutting the taxes. And of course, what that does is that's set up in a way to say that if you vote for this tax cut, the children are going to suffer, bluebird butterflies and sunshine are all going to come to an end because it's so important that these stupid taxes and fees and costs that have been imposed on you that we got to keep them growing because the bureaucrats need them to continue to grift off of your life energy and make sure that you give us more money. That's going to be, it's a 10-word statement, but essentially they have to put that in the beginning. And there was an argument to be made, and Joel Ard was the attorney who challenged the impact statements ahead of time with what's called a writ of mandamus. So the argument was in front of Judge Zip. I was in the courtroom. It was covered on TVW, but it was interesting just to see the dynamics there. Noah Purcell, who's the Solicitor General, kind of the number 2 position at the AG's office, was arguing on the other side. And so there's this high drama in the sense that there was a big focus on this case. And like most judges in Thurston County, I've talked about the Thurston County Superior Court for a while. That's the court where the Constitution goes to die, and Judge Zip is one of the more lefty-leaning judges. After watching that courtroom, I definitely would be affidavitting her off of any case that ever comes up in front of her, because you're just never going to get a fair hearing with somebody like that who's such an ardent leftist and clearly is pining for some kind of future appointment to a higher judicial office and trying to earn her way there by basically always ruling against the people and against the ability of people to actually reduce their taxes in this case. But it still was insightful because the arguments made by the state kind of undermined the whole case behind some of these taxes. And it's a worthwhile video to do again in the future. I didn't have a chance to do that this week either, but I was in the courtroom on that Friday, took some photos. And so there may be a longer follow-up that I'll be able to do on it maybe next week. But with that, I do have 2 videos coming up this week. I'm interested in getting your feedback on it. I think you'll like both of them, and I think they're pretty worthwhile. Let's get into some of the comments here. And the first one, of course, I've had up on the screen here for a little while. And The Thunderstriker 303, who tells me he lives in Arizona, but right now he's in New York City. So hello from Washington State. And as you know, I went to school in New York City, and it's sometimes fun to visit, but I certainly wouldn't want to live there, especially now. Woke coma, I suppose. It has a question, or not really a question here. Just I'm very disappointed with the flustercluck that is the governor's race and Republican Party, especially with the infighting. This could hurt lower ticket races that are even more important to me. Sorry, you might not be able to see that, the complete question there. And yeah, I mean, listen, the infighting on the Republican side is always disappointing. It does seem to be pretty common. One of the challenges I think you're going to find in partisan politics, and this has always been a challenge for a long time, I think, is that infighting is more important to some people than actually fighting the primary opposition that they have. I mean, I'm a Republican PCO, have been for quite some time. I was chair of the College Republicans when I was at Columbia. But I really view myself more as a liberty and freedom-oriented person. I'm against government corruption, whether it's Republican or Democrat, doesn't really matter. I just want less government involvement and harassment in the average day or average life. If we could find a way to reduce it, that would really help. And the problem with what you find is that a lot of people's personality is such that they're actually afraid to fight the left because they put the left up on some kind of a pedestal. And even though the left is clearly orchestrating the demise of their freedom and liberty and their future in this country, they'll admit that they are afraid to fight the left. They'd rather fight people on their own side, which is safer, it's closer, it's simpler, and you can come up with all kinds of arguments and reasons why the other people around you aren't perfectly pure enough to hold the same standard that you're at, and you can always infight. It's like people who like to fight amongst their family, and they're timid and afraid to fight the bully neighbor down the street, right? I mean, it's kind of that same profile. And so partisan politics brings out a lot of the worst in people, and infighting is just one of the sideshow examples of it. I think sometimes you have to step back from that and just still stay focused on the things that do matter to you and that matter the most. The partisan political process is not going to solve all your problems. It won't. But I think that you still stay engaged, but you kind of have to look past it. Also, we're still several months away. The primary is going to sort out who exactly is going to be on the ballot in November. The primary is very important because depending on how those votes go, that is going to be what sorts it all out. But we'll see where it goes. Let's see. The next question here. Can you please, this is Sonera Frankenstein, can you please give us a clear description of Washington's death inheritance taxes and how to avoid them? Well, I mean, I'm not going to give you you're not going to avoid inheritance taxes if your estate is large enough to qualify under Washington state law. I actually don't remember what the cutoff is, but I do know that it's lower than the federal inheritance tax levels. If it was up to me, I would actually target this and eliminate it largely as a tax at all, because it's you're double, triple taxing assets and reducing the ability, especially if you're running a farm or a business and you're trying to hand it off to the next generation, who statistically is not going to probably do a good job running it, but right, they always say every business ends after 3 generations for the most part. But there's no way to really avoid it other than there are structures, I believe. I would look into trusts and other types of structures that you can probably set up that really just change assets that you might have in farms or businesses into more of a corporation, in the sense it's something that your kids or generations can be involved in owning part of it long before it becomes an inheritance tax question. But I'm not an expert on that. You're going to need somebody that is, so I don't feel totally comfortable at adequately giving you the information to answer that question here. Woke coma back again here. How can we deal with the division, especially in Pierce County at the governor's level? Well, listen, I mean, this is going to work itself out in 2 months anyway. You have a Republican infighting over 2 Republican governor candidates. And essentially we only have 2. I mean, there's 28 people on the ballot, but only 2 of them are Republicans that seem to be raising enough money. There is an independent on the ballot right now who's raising some money. You have a couple Democrats, Mark Mullet, which I've discussed in previous shows. I'll probably have to do like another update on the governor's race video, which I'll try to do soon. And I think that there's that might be worthwhile to just kind of explain to it. But people want to control things that they can't control, and you're just not going to be able to control the fact that people get into kind of cult of personalities on all sides, really. And so you decide, okay, I really like this guy. That's who I'm going to support. Totally fine. Everybody does that. I've done that before too, where it was somebody I really knew well beforehand. And so you get to pick your person and you support them. But when they don't win in the election, then you recalibrate and you go back and you pick whoever does. And I've had to go through that myself several times. And you will too, most likely. And no matter which side you're on, I mean, every now and then it's your guy that kind of makes it through all the way, and that's exciting when that happens. But it just doesn't all the time. So it's one of those things you have to be aware of. Pierce County, I'm not aware of Pierce County having any more unusual divisions than I've seen in Whatcom and Spokane and Franklin and Clark and Thurston and a number of other counties around the state. So these divisions are fairly normal, and don't freak out about them. Jason, you got a question here. Happy Tuesday. Without stating your opinion on a particular candidate and more about campaign advice, should Byrd consider dropping out, running 2028 to sort out his issues? Well, I mean, here's the thing. At this point in time in a political campaign, you don't really have the option to drop out. Your name's still on the ballot. I mean, I guess you could stop campaigning if you wanted to, but once you're past, in this case, this year, past May 13th, there's no dropping out. The dropping out period was back then, because then your name wouldn't be on the ballot. And a number of people who we all know, if you've been paying attention to some of these other races here, they did drop out, right? They didn't get the endorsement of the Republican Party, or they didn't raise enough money in that period of time before the race. And then they decided, hey, it's not going to work, and so they dropped out before that May 13th deadline. After that, dropping out's semantics, and it doesn't really change too much the direction of the race moving forward. People are still going to see your name on the ballot. Now, arguably, you could drop out and say that you're not going to campaign. You could but I don't know why you would do that after you've been out there working as long as you have. One of the things, and I think I've discussed this in some of my analysis of the governor's race, I mean, there's a couple of things that every campaign, you got to be fairly clear-headed about this as far as tactics and strategies that work in campaigning. Removing the personalities and the drama from it, what are some basic things that do work fairly well? Number one, it does work out well for campaigns, especially if you're a grassroots-oriented campaign, to start early. Byrd did a great job starting early. He started 2 years early. And I used to have a saying when I was putting on classes to help teach people to run for local office. And there was a period of time where I recruited and trained around 200-300 people over those years. And it's mostly to run for school board and city council races. You don't need me to recruit you to run for a higher office than that. You start at this local level, and that's a good way to test out your skills, your ability, the process of campaigning, and just educating people on what it's all about before they step up and run for higher office. So anyway, we had the saying, start late, lose early. And it was fairly appropriate saying in most cases. Those people who decide at the last minute on filing week that they're going to suddenly run for office, it's not really your optimal path to success, assuming that you want to succeed. So starting early is really smart. Byrd did a good job starting early. Reichert, in his campaign, has done a much better job in coalescing funding for his campaign. Now, my concern, again, I still have this concern, regardless of anything else, it's still the same concern I have, which is diverting too much of that money into overhead costs associated with consultants. It doesn't do you any good to raise more money if you're squandering it on consultants that are providing little value. So it's one of those thing. If it's not direct voter contact, your money's probably getting wasted. Byrd has the opposite problem in the sense that he hasn't been able to raise the money to adequately communicate his campaign out there. And as that disparity between the two campaigns increases, and it seems to be on a trajectory where the Reichert campaign is raising a lot of money and the Byrd campaign's not raising very much, that disparity just makes it hard to overcome. It's not a judgment call on any individual. I mean, it's just math, and the math doesn't support the ability to market yourself really well. So you have to, if you're in the Byrd campaign, you have to run a much more grassroots-oriented campaign. Now, the challenge that you have with these races is the fact that it's whatever scandal stories are going to come out. And Byrd's just had a lot of those. I think some of them he's dealt with pretty well. I think others are just more of a challenge to deal with properly. And there's a certain point where you just can't keep having so many stories that come out. If they're based on nothing, that's one thing. Everybody knows that Democrats going to make up stuff all the time about every candidate. It doesn't matter what you think. If you are a Republican in Washington State, even if you've never worn a MAGA hat in your life, it won't matter. Nobody cares about the nuances that you think you've introduced into your political campaign. You will be a MAGA hat, Trump-loving person, even if you hate Trump, they're going to say that. So it's just funny that people think that the candidates think that because you've made some nuance difference in your positioning, that's going to exist anywhere when it comes to how the campaign is going to be marketed and what you're actually running out there. So anyway, that's just... we'll just have to see how that goes. But dropping out, as you kind of mentioned there, I don't think that's a realistic option. When candidates don't do as well as they hope in an election, then they come back and they have to think about, well, what's my next step, right? And no matter what happens in this campaign, you're going to have some candidates that are in that position. Mark Mullet, for example, the Democrat who's running for governor, I don't see, even though he spent about $1 million, I don't see him, he hasn't moved the needle a lot. Love what he's done with the ethics complaint against Bob Ferguson. I love what he's done pointing out the $1 million bribe to the Democrat Party. I love what he's done when it comes to his bar complaint against Bob Ferguson. Those are aggressive moves that distinguish you from other people running this office, running for this position, and you're clearly willing to take Ferguson on directly. But he hasn't been able to move the needle much as far as I can see, and so my prediction is that Mullet doesn't come out of the primary. But it doesn't mean, if he loses, he's going to have to sit back and think. He was on the Issaquah City Council for a while before. His dad was the mayor of Tukwila. He's got a lot of background in politics. He'll sit back and reevaluate and decide what he's going to do. But I don't know that dropping out is going to be a realistic option at this point in time. The time to drop out was months ago, and once you reach this point, it doesn't seem to be much of an option. Republicans are going to mess this up, and Fergie will end up winning. Well, I don't want to be an Eeyore because I've seen these things change so fast and so many other times in the past, so I wouldn't presume that. Ferguson is dropping his own stink bombs all over the place right now, and I don't think it's predictable for sure where that's going to go. Tom Mannion to clarify Washington State on the handgun issue. Well, I don't know. That's not really a question, so I don't know what you're asking there, actually. So if you want to restate a question there, so maybe I can answer it, and I'll do my best. Let's see. Jason Vanderkoy, after listening to Byrd speak, I'm assuming you mean I can understand why Dave won't debate him. Do you think this is a big mistake by Dave? Listen, the challenge with debates, and this is one of those things, I've occasionally been the moderator at political debates, and I've been involved in helping organize political debates. This goes back for me 12 years, I think now. The first series of debates that I helped organize was in 2012, and I was trying to show, I was at the Freedom Foundation, and we were trying to organize debates for executive level statewide positions that there was no attention given to them in the media. And so if at the time I remember it was the Treasurer, Secretary of State, and the Auditor is kind of what I remember. I think we might have tried to do the Public Lands Commissioner too, but I just remember these other positions that nobody's paying attention to. And so I wasn't the moderator there, but I was helping to organize those debates. And so we organized them in multiple cities. And they were great in a way. I mean, you always had hardcore lefties that decided that they had their own crew that was going to support them, and they didn't need that debate and the attention it was going to get. One of the debates that year was for the Secretary of State's race. And it was actually, if I remember right, Milosha was running, and Mark Milosha, and he was debating Kim Wyman in her first run for the Secretary of State's office. And the leftists at the time drew I don't remember. Anyway, she was number 3 at the governor's office. She refused to participate. So did some other crazy leftists. And so only Mark Milosha, who was a moderate Democrat at the time before he became a Republican, and Kim Wyman, who was coming out of the Thurston County Auditor's office, they had a debate. And it was wonkish, and it was detailed, and there was a lot of back and forth going on in that debate. And it was a pretty good way for about an hour of them comparing and contrasting their positions, right? And probably equivalent skill sets as far as delivering the information. And when I had talked to Kim Wyman about it years later, and a couple years later on this, and she said that she really felt that debate at the time really helped her get the endorsements from a couple of more traditional newspapers, because it had covered so much wonkish stuff and the newspapers generally are always going to endorse Democrats, but every now and then they feel like they have to pretend like they're bipartisan and they'll endorse a Republican. And they picked Wyman that time because they had this wonkish background of her from this debate, and they used the debate as a good portion of the talking points they brought up in their editorial board review. So that was the value I found in the debate for the situations like that. When you're in the governor's race, it's just like a presidential debate. Oftentimes what happens is whoever feels like they're in the lead doesn't feel like they need to debate. And so at this point in time, you're having Dave Reichertz, who feels like he's probably polling-wise is in the lead in the Republican side, and so he doesn't need to debate Byrd. That's his attitude. Byrd is I think Byrd is a more dynamic public speaker. I've said this before. I've said this many times. And obviously I've been around both of them. And again, I'm not trying to endorse anybody at all in this race. And I'm just trying to point out what the obvious skill sets are here and there. Byrd does a good job, I think, delivering a speech and speaking off the fly. And I think he does a pretty good job reaching out and kind of that grassroots politicking sort of thing. And the challenge with the debate right now between the two of them is it's not really the candidates. I actually think that both Reichert and Semi Byrd would probably do okay in a debate. The problem is more of their supporters on both sides attacking each other so viciously, like it's the end of the world. Like probably very few of them have ever attacked Democrats in their life. They're just attacking each other, though, super aggressively. And so that, I think, makes it a challenge when you're trying to get the two of them up on stage and debate each other. I would love to see that debate. I don't know if it's going to happen. And again, each campaign's they're going to get their own, have their own perspective on why they don't think about, why they think that's positive or negative for them. The debate that's most likely going to happen at least once is going to be a debate between the Democrat and the Republican candidate that survives the scrum. And that'll be pushed, though, that probably very few people who are watching this video would have much influence on. It's going to have more to do with whether the media decides that, yes, indeed, they want that debate. So I'm sorry I've got a new program here. I'm just trying to make sure I'm on top of this here with getting to your questions. Jason Vander Koy. We saw in 2020, middle-of-the-road people don't back Culp. Today, those same people are demanding conservatives support Dave. Can Dave win the conservative support or vote? Listen, I think that especially if we end up having a Ferguson on one side and then fill in the blank on the other, it is insane. It is truly insane. In fact, you're completely delusional if you think that anybody else running in this office, including the weirdest person you pull out of that scrum, because there's 28 people running, every living soul of them are better than Ferguson for governor. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And the thing is, there's no comparison. Ferguson is the worst person anybody's ever put up to run for governor. At least if you care about freedom and liberty, sanity, anything normal in life, Ferguson's the worst. And so whoever comes through, I guarantee I'm supporting whoever's going to be opposed to Ferguson, presuming Ferguson comes through. I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming that he probably will. So the question is, who are you going to support? Not voting is stupid because it means nothing. It might mean something in your own head. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard people say they're going to do because nobody cares about your virtue signaling pretense that you're not going to vote. That doesn't mean anything. All you're doing is surrendering your vote to somebody else that'll probably vote for you instead. Even if you don't think your vote counts that much, still do it anyway. Then it's a microscopic, just a teeny amount of time for the people who are actually going to do some work out there to try to make a difference. Just make it a little bit easier for them. There's a number of elections this last cycle, just this last November, that were lost by one vote or less. There was a vote in Ocean Shores. City councilwoman would have been great to get her in office. She lost her election by one vote, and it would have made a difference. We had a good mayor get elected there to try to rein in some of the abuse and corruption in that city. And what happens? There were 20 or 30 people in Ocean Shores who decided their vote didn't count, and they didn't bother to vote. And their self-destruction and stupidity ensured that we were short a good person who would have made a good difference in Ocean Shores and the city council. Same thing happened up in Whatcom County, where you had a small voter turnout on a tax increase. You had a Republican county commissioner up there, or county council member up there, who foolishly endorsed this tax increase. It was a dumb tax. It was a terrible tax. And she endorsed it, which added to just enough confusion. And you had just a handful of votes difference because of that shifted into that tax support under a very low turnout election. And I could think of hundreds of people up in Whatcom who didn't vote because they thought their vote didn't count. And if they had voted, they would have voted against a dumb tax. It wouldn't have been on the ballot, and they wouldn't have had to go out and collect signatures to repeal that tax, which is what they're doing in Whatcom right now. Plenty of examples like this. So you may be too lazy or to do anything, and voting is, you may be so lazy you think that even voting is too much. But if you can just get your vote across the finish line, the 10 minutes that it takes to fill that darn thing out, even if it's just for the initiatives, get her done, get it sent in, let the rest of us who are going to do real work give us at least a little bit more of a chance to help move the ball forward in this effort. So my guess, going back to what Jason you're asking, I don't know why Dave wouldn't get the support in that type of situation, because the reality is it would be, Satan himself versus somebody who's going to be much more rational. So anyway, let's go. I haven't heard much. Here is Scenario. I haven't heard much from Inslee in months. No big climate change speeches. Is he just hiding, or is he focusing on new projects after his governorship? I would say he's mostly just focused on new projects. I mean, Inslee doesn't want, I suspect that his employment post-governorship depends on defeating one of the initiatives, which is the 2117, which is a repeal of the Climate Commitment Act scam, fake gas tax scam. And so he wants that badly. I mean, it oozes from his pores. I mean, he's not the smartest guy out there, but at least that oozes from his pores. It's not really because of anything he believes in. It's going to be because he's got something that he's planning to use that law that he pushed through aggressively and lobbied for, and it had failed multiple times in the past. And so because of that, I think that's really his obsession, is making sure that he's leaving the governor's office and has a cushy place to jump into. A lot of these guys that get into politics, especially if they've been there for a while, and this is just a human nature thing, they've created the center of the universe, and they've let it go to their head, and they think that they really do matter as much as people act like they matter. And the truth is they don't, but the position they're in does matter. And so lobbyists and all these other people always come up and kiss up to them and put them on a pedestal and treat them. It's kind of like a lower version of like what you get out of Hollywood, probably, if you're an actor. And so they're just trying to push this guy and put him up on a pedestal, and people who leave the political process suddenly discover that nobody cares about them the minute they're gone, and they think that they're carrying some kind of accolades or attention or value over from that political office, and in most cases they don't. There are rare cases where somebody just stands out as an interesting person or a skilled person, or they bring a lot more to the table than just that political position they were holding in life. But a lot of these, especially these Democrats, really aren't going to have much to show for their life when they're gone. Nobody's going to miss them. Nobody cares. Ferguson, Inslee, I think, is starting to realize that. And so he's scrambling around, trying to make sure at least he gets a big pile of cash when he leaves. It's the same old story. You've seen it 100 times. We're going to see it a bunch more in the future. And that's my guess. If I was to, and nobody really cares what he has to say. He's clearly a lame duck, so nobody cares. Alex Brown got a question. If we were placing bets, personal ideology and desires aside, what's your prediction for the upcoming elections and the future of higher offices in Washington? All of that depends on just a couple of factors, right? And let's future of higher offices, let's assume that you're asking a question about the state level and not about the federal level. It's very, there's 100 other people, 1,000 other people, 10,000 other people that are doing stories about the presidential elections and how that hits any state moving, below like Washington, which is generally going to be considered a state that's probably unlikely to go to Trump. Although Biden, if they keep him propped up long enough, like Weekend at Bernie's, maybe he'll just be so bad that that he convinces enough, that he convinces enough Democrats not to vote for him. I don't know, but there's a strong anti-Trump movement on the Democrat side in the state that might be strong enough that Trump can't overcome that in our state. However, obviously, top-the-ticket impacts are trickle down to lower offices, and the lower offices then would be the state level. What's interesting, though, is in Washington State, I think the initiatives that actually come at the very top of our ballots are going to have more of an impact for people who want to reduce their cost of living. The Vote Yes, Pay Less option for people, especially if they also get this gas tax or the Initiative 2066, which is the repealing the natural gas ban, which isn't a ban, but it was the foundation for a ban. And so repealing that, which I've done some videos on already, those four, if they get four initiatives, all of them, Vote Yes, Pay Less, are not hard sells. They pull really, really high with average people, particularly people that are just upset and angry about the economic conditions in which they live. And so they're going to want to find any way and any excuse they have to reduce their cost of living. And those three initiatives, potentially four, are going to be good paths for them to at least vote yes to pay less. If they do that, and I think it's likely that they do, then if they keep just taking that extra couple seconds going down ballot, they're most likely to vote for people that would align with their beliefs after that. And that's going to generally be more Republican-leaning folk. The governor's race gets a lot of money thrown into it, usually, and there's a lot of attention. It's a senior executive position. Republicans haven't won that position in a long time. They've come close. They've screwed up a few times, in my opinion. And I do think the 2004 race was definitely fraud was involved in that election cycle. However, in giving it to Gregoire versus Rossi that cycle. But when you look at this impact, there's always these sea changes that occur in populations. Some of them show up on surveys. Some of them you just see things starting to change, but you don't necessarily see it fully reflected until you actually see motivation and what actually happens at the ballot box, or at least with the results and how they count them. And there's a couple things that are impacting everybody in Washington, and they're going to have an impact on the states, and they're more important than the campaigns that you see running out there right now. One is the economy. As the economy gets worse, inflation gets higher, cost of rent keeps going up, the stupidity of government squandering whatever resources they get, all of that's going to affect people who are probably not otherwise engaged in the political process. They're just angry and frustrated that they can't afford the groceries, or they've seen the prices go up. And they know they're being lied to by the media, saying that, hey, it's okay, everything's not that bad. No, these people have been going to the grocery store, and who are you going to believe? What you're actually paying, or what some clown at the Seattle Times is saying? They're going to look and say, I'm paying a lot more right now. I'm paying 30% more in groceries, whatever it is. That's going to have a big impact. I think the crime is going to have a big impact. One of the reasons, and just in case you don't think that this is true, you can see this reflected in the campaigns, especially somebody like Ferguson, who's been nasty on crime, totally useless in solving violent crime. If anything, he's facilitated more crime than the crime wave in Washington. He's done nothing as Attorney General to make your life safer or better at all. He's helped violent sex predators get into the neighborhoods. He's helped decriminalize violent criminals and get them out as soon as he can in the public. This guy's done nothing. Well, violent crime has tended to create waves of election cycle change in America. I witnessed it firsthand when I lived in New York City, and I watched Giuliani get elected. I've witnessed it in Washington State in 1994 because I think that was a big part of the movement that led to a complete shocking change in the political control of the state for a while. And all those things, I think, are and then the other part is especially in Washington, we have a large Asian community, which is not fair to lump it all together because you have Chinese and Vietnamese and Filipino and Korean and Japanese and a number of different kind of pockets, but a strong Asian community generally that lines up a lot on the conservative values that are theoretically reflected in the Republican Party's platform. But one thing they definitely aren't reflected in is whatever the Democrats are doing. The Democrats' insane attack on merit in education and increasing the violence and craziness of crime and the cost of living directly attacks most people who live in that community. It's not a benefit to them at all. And as it becomes clearer that one side, the Democrats, clearly support violent crime and more crime, and they want higher taxes, they want more incompetent government, they want the cost of living to go up, and they want education to be crappy and get worse, that's going to have an impact, I think, on how a lot of people vote. And I don't know how well that's really reflected in the modern polling processes at all. So right now, we're a little ways away. I think the primary is going to give us a little indication of where things are going, but nothing's guaranteed. And I also think you're going to have some sleeper elections in some of the lower statewide offices. We've had Republicans hold a number of other statewide offices over the last few years and recently, and things can change, and we'll have to see what happens. Great question here by Robert Parker. What advice would you give to help Bird follow the campaign finance laws? Listen, as everybody knows, I file lots of Public Disclosure Commission complaints against. In fact, I just had 2 different. I haven't even done a video on this yet. I've had 6 different groups around the state that had official sanctions and warning letters from the PDC. The 18th Legislative District Democrats, the 49th Legislative District Democrats. I think the 39th Legislative District Democrats, the Cowlitz County Democrats, and a couple other PACs along the way. And then I also had a couple that were fined. There was the Question PAC out of Eastern Washington, which is just this leftist group. Leftist guy really started a PAC to call Republican names. It was just a dumb idea and poorly executed. And so he just was fined $300 last week or 2 weeks ago. And then a Democrat who was running in the 37th Leg District out of Seattle a couple years ago. This complaint went on for a long time. But they just fined not just that candidate who totally botched everything on his campaign finance stuff, but they also fined the treasurer separately. So it was like 2 $500 fines that were imposed at the same time. And here's what usually this goes back to following campaign finance laws. Number one, try to just timeliness matters. Accuracy matters, but timeliness matters a lot. And so be accurate and timely in your reporting. And I don't pretend that the campaign finance laws are easy to comply with always, but just be accurate and timely in your filing. Secondly, hire a professional to do your paperwork, especially at the level that you would be running for governor. You might be able to get away with doing your own campaign finance filing for like local races, small little races, or mini reporting races, which are under $7,000, but you're not going to be able to do it and still run a campaign. You're not going to be able to do both those things when you're running for governor or any of those statewide races. I definitely encourage hiring a professional. You need to hire one that's familiar with the campaign finance laws, not just a CPA. I generally get almost everybody that's a CPA who's a treasurer for a campaign. They almost all break the law. It may not be intentional, but they do. So number one, just get somebody professional who knows what they're doing. Number two, focus on timeliness and accuracy. Most of the time, you're going to be okay on that stuff. When it comes to financial disclosure documents, those are a little different because F1s are usually your treasurer's not involved in it, and there you just need to be as accurate as possible in how you report information. Let's see. So I just encourage somebody to help out. I prefer to see people file accurately and not get in trouble. Just because you do get in trouble doesn't mean it's the end of the world. But I've caught a lot of people. I think I'm over 303 now total politicians, mostly on the left, that violate the law, and I catch them all the time. I got some more I just haven't had a chance to file yet that I've noticed when I was looking through the PDCs just recently. Technical difficulties. Have you seen Semi-Bird's rebuttal to the allegations against him regarding stolen valor? I've seen some of it. I don't know that I've seen it all, because when I said that I had thought I had seen it last time, some people were saying that I'd missed something, and so maybe I've missed some version of it. And I had run into Semi, and we're on friendly terms. I mean, this isn't like I'm trying to get into a fight with anybody. At the Skagit County Republicans, which I think was shortly after this story initially broke. But there are a couple of things that, if I have missed something on it, one of the issues you don't want to focus on, at least if I was in Semi's shoes, I wouldn't be focused on whether the documents were taken illegally out of your records or not. The question is, are the documents accurate? And if they're accurate, what's the background that you need to fully explain, what's going on there? And so that's the issue. And I think I had brought it up last time. Just, if you're in Semi's shoes, you need to have really clear responses to this. There's what do they call it? DD 214, which is the military. It's kind of like it's not, I believe me, if you're in the military, you understand that I'm not speaking as somebody who is in the military. I am starting to become more familiar with how to file records requests, but I had to deal with this a couple years ago with somebody who had lied about their military background. And so I'm a little rusty on getting these documents, because it's not particularly easy to get records from the military, but it looks like a lot of records are being posted. If you have a military background and educational, those are the two things especially, get ahead of it if you think there's some kind of scandal coming, and post up your form so that people can see exactly what your military background is. And by all accounts, I think most of what I have read, and I've spoken to Semi about this, I had him on my show a number of months ago, but it was before some of these recent stories had come out. You have things that you should brag about, right? Things that you've done in the military that you're very proud of, and I think that's important. If you have challenges with your background, you're going to have an explanation for what that is. This shouldn't be really even it shouldn't be a surprise. The other thing is education. Now, usually I don't see Republicans do this, but I've seen a lot of Democrats, and I've caught many politicians doing this, where they'll claim that they went to some place and they really didn't go there. There was a mayor of Mercer Island I was involved in catching a couple years ago, claimed that she went to Cornell. I don't know why somebody'd lie about going to Cornell, but she claimed that she had graduated from Cornell and had a degree from Cornell. She didn't. She had gone there for like a partial semester one time and dropped out. But that was it. She never got anything from Cornell. And lying about that in Mercer Island was kind of stupid, because there's enough Cornell grads that were in that district that they were able to easily go online and look up the fact that she wasn't referenced in any alumni periodical from that period. This is normal stuff that you look up. It just is. You want to verify. People lie about stuff all the time. And so as part of like a due diligence thing, you're just going to check it off. And if you want to get ahead, I was running for office myself in 2010, and the Democrats thought I'd never gone to Columbia. I was amused by it. I thought that was great that they thought that, and because it's easy to verify. All you'd have to do is go back and look, for me anyway, because I was so active when I was at college that almost every issue, The Spectator, which was the weekly newspaper that they put out on at Columbia, I was in it. And so it was easy to go in and see that I'd attended. I was either on the front page annoying the left in my political activities, or sometimes I wrote editorials, and then other times I was always in the back for sports, because I was a cross country and track guy. So it'd be easy to verify. Did Glenn lie about going to Columbia? Well, you could go back and see that I didn't, and it's easy to see that I graduated, and all this stuff is easy to verify, and they did. There was a guy that went to Dartmouth, a Democrat chair at the time, and so he went and did all this background on me, and was probably pissed off that I was accurate in how I represented it. So I think as long as if you're in this kind of a scandal cycle that Bert is in, it's defensive, but you're in a cycle, then have your answer and put it out there and explain what that answer is. I think recently, he just posted up transcripts from a couple of places where he had degrees. Excellent. Good move. That's get ahead of it, put it out there, and then keep campaigning. You don't want to spend your time, no matter who you are, if you're running for office, in perpetual scandal mode or dealing with this stuff. It's just eventually people just lose track of what's going on. They can't keep track of the disputes or the arguments or whatever it is, and it just sends you down rabbit holes that you don't want to be down if you're serious about running for office. And it's really hard, particularly at a governor's level race. Let's see. Jack Palder here, you're asking a question here about are signatures still being gathered for the repeal of capital gains tax? I've been confused lately. Jack, the answer to that is no. They collected way more signatures than they needed last year. End of December, they finished collecting those signatures. They submitted them to the Secretary of State. They were approved, I believe, by end of January. They had over 110,000 extra signatures on that one, more than they needed, and went to the legislature. The legislature ignored it, so it's going to be on this November's ballot. So, Jack, what you need to do is just vote for it when it comes out there. Vote yes, pay less. You're going to see that on the November ballot. When you get that. However, one thing I will point out, you see people out there gathering signatures right now. To my knowledge, there's only one thing that they're gathering signatures for, which is to basically repeal the state's beginning foundational documents or bills that they've kind of been passing here lately, but particularly one that came out this last legislative session at 2 in the morning to basically make it harder for you to have natural gas at home. And so it's 2066. That's probably the only one you're seeing them collect signatures for out there. There was a signature drive effort going on up in Whatcom County to repeal a property tax. They collected twice as many signatures as they need to get that on the ballot. So I think that's also coming up. But that's it. Pretty much anybody collecting signatures that I've seen out there this year so far are good initiatives. Doesn't mean there can't be bad ones, but anything that I've seen out there so far has been pretty good. For whatever reason, I'm not pulling up in my screen right here. I'm not. Let me see if I can get down here lower. There it is. Okay. For some reason, no. Sorry, guys. There's a lot of questions here. Whoa. Let me catch up to this. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Sally S. You got a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to get to them. Sally S. Is there any recourse to force Chris Reichel to follow the parental rights initiative that just went into law? And I just did a video about this. What an idiot. So this guy and his weirdo meltdown decided that he's trying to direct the schools to ignore it. And yes, there's going to be plenty of recourse. Find the district stupid enough to try to conceal this information from you, and let's litigate against a bunch of them. And we can mock them for concealing the truth, but just see if you can have a competition right now to see which school district's dumb enough to listen to this guy and lose the next lawsuit on this. It's kind of ridiculous. Let's see. Scenario, yeah, I like debates too. And remember, debates, by the way, don't have to be some kind of nasty back and forth. They can be just simply, I actually prefer the debates, and I've done these in the past where I was a moderator, and I kind of encourage this, which is, what's your position on this? What's your position on this? Here, I want clear explanations so people can see a contrast between candidates. It's very helpful if you can do that. So I agree with you on the debate side. Shell Henderson, do you know anything about the coast shipping truckloads of human waste to the east side? Thanks. I haven't looked into this for a number of years. What this is the wastewater treatment facilities on the larger ones are on the west side. They're not all over there because you have some big ones that are around Spokane and in the Tri-Cities area. And I believe Ellensburg is a pretty large one too. But anyway, so one of the things that they've tried in the past has been processing the human waste, the solids usually that come out of it, mainly for the nitrates that they can basically put back into the soil for fertilizer. That's kind of been the theory. The problems that they've had with this have actually been mostly around a failure to properly test and track certain types of heavy metals, some types of pharmaceuticals that aren't fully removed in the wastewater treatment process, and other things that are just generally not testing for. And it makes it scary. I wouldn't put them on fields that I was growing anything that for human consumption. What I have seen them do, mainly in forest reclamation projects, and I saw them do this because I was on the Small Farm Forestry Association, so I was able to get some tours of the big facility outside of Centralia. It's huge. It's kind of not far from where I live. And they did forest reclamation where they had been doing coal mining over the years, and they would refill in the holes after they were done coal mining. When I say holes, I'm talking massive. I mean, whole cities, little cities could disappear in these holes. Anyway, they would reclamate and they would fill it back in, and so the ground's a little bit lower because they've taken the coal out. And it's one of the only, I think it was the last coal mine. They aren't doing it now, but they were mining there for many years. And so the top layer, when they put that ground back on, they'd reforest. And there's forests that have been growing there now for 40, 50 years as they reclamate. And one of the things they experimented there with was putting the human waste from the wastewater treatment facilities in there as a type of fertilizer just for the trees. And to the best that I can see, it's generally worked out pretty well. But I don't know that they've done complete testing and soil sampling over time, and I would recommend that you do that in all these cases. Be very careful, and I certainly wouldn't put it into any food consumption crop situation that you might have. Thunderstriker, you've said that I'm skipping your questions, and I do not know what questions I'm skipping. So ask a question again, and I'll not skip it. Jason, in your opinion, is Vancouver starting to become like Portland? The homeless have taken over the area around Peace Health Hospital and many areas around Vancouver. At night, it gets crazy. Yes, it does. And the problem with this is that when the left institutes a policy in some city, Portland in particular, legalizing drugs, importing more homeless, drug addicts, massive, unaccountable grant grifting operations that simply encourage growing more people, then they're never satisfied with destroying just one city. So they're going to try to spread, and also they want to spread to Vancouver because they want to have more grant grifting operations over there. Clark County has been a thorn in the side of the left for a while because it's tended to vote more conservative generally. And so Portland, the left always exports their destruction to wherever you live. If you're moving to Idaho and think you're getting away from this, you're delusional, because the left will target. They cannot exist without destroying everybody around them who tries to be left alone. Remember, the biggest difference between the left and the rest of us is that the rest of us want to be left alone. The left just wants to keep abusing and controlling you, and so you can't escape that attitude. You have to stop it. You have to defeat it. You have to crush it, because there's just no way to get away from it. You'll never be able to run far enough. Brandon Hooper, I'm assuming you mean good evening instead of goof evening. If we get a Republican in office, will Sideshow Bob still be our AG? No, under no scenario is Bob Ferguson going to be the AG. He's not running. He's surrendered that option. You got a three-way runoff right now going for the AG's race. You have Nick Brown and Manka Dingra on the Democrat side, and you have Pete Serrano on the Republican side. I've done a video about this. Not a lot's changed since then. What has probably changed a little bit is just that the Democrats seem to have decided that Manka Dingra is even too insane and crazy for them, and so the political insiders have kind of coalesced around Nick Brown, who's more of a transactional, left-leaning Democrat who will, sell his soul to get what he wants, but he seems to be less crazy than Manka Dingra, and that seems to be where they're going there right now. Let's see. Here's a question from Maj Greg Carpenter. What about the new gun control laws that he has started? Now you pay the Washington State Patrol for a background check, and they still make you wait 10 days for the purchase. Are we losing our 2A and W? Are we losing our Second Amendment rights in Washington? The answer to that is, over the last few years, we have lost a lot of our Second Amendment rights. But keep in mind, we haven't lost them. We've surrendered them temporarily, just like we did in 1986 nationally, when we decided to allow the federal government to take away our, under the Reagan signed that bill. I distinctly remember it. And after the Stockton, California shooting, and then again, that was overturned, and then we had better access to firearms for many years, for about 15 years before, again, now they're coming back to try to do this again. They'll never stop. That isn't how the left works. We're in a fight. You got to keep fighting. You got to keep pushing back. So That's just one of those issues. Jason Vanderkoy, it seems Dave, I'm assuming you mean Dave Reichert's more focused on convincing a semi is not the guy instead of promoting himself. Is this the look of a leader? And I'm assuming you mean that's a question. From what I've seen, I don't see Dave talking a lot about semi at all. You have supporters on both sides, right, that are attacking each other. But generally, the candidates, from what I've seen, aren't really attacking each other much. You don't have a lot of control over who's helping your campaign. And yes, if I was in the Reichert camp, I'd be more focused on trying to detail the plans and programs that you'd be implementing or what makes you so different than the Democrats. Probably inside the Reichert campaign, most of them aren't paying that much attention to Sammy Byrd at this point in time because of just the polling. A lot of people do run political campaigns based on their polling, and if they don't think the other guy's polling anywhere near them, then they're not going to pay much attention to him. They're going to focus on trying to run their own campaign, and that's probably more about what's going on. So than anything else. This is Thunderstrike. Here's one of your questions. This one I see. What do you know about Trump felony charges from the 2024 election? I don't know anything about 2024 felony charges. I do know that the obvious problem with the New York court case, which nobody's ever had a law degree, actually thinks is reasonable or rational. And it, weirdly enough, seems to have actually helped him because it's simply they're just turning Trump into a martyr. And I suspect that's how it's going to impact the 2024 election. The bigger question right now is, with Biden's decline so extreme and obvious that anybody can see, there seems to be some messages that have been given to the traditional media that they can pull off the gloves and attack Biden now. You see this in the New York Times and some of these other more traditional media outlets where they're panicking a little bit, seeing that looks like Trump's doing so much better. And so you can see this panic going on right now. And the question is Biden even going to be the presidential candidate for the Democrats coming up in a little while? And I don't know, because it seems like that could be changing. What are your thoughts on the new bridge, Jason? What are your thoughts on the new bridge connecting Portland and Vancouver? What's the pros and cons of possibly having light rail? Well, light rail is a disaster. A new bridge is okay and probably necessary. It's even better if it's wider and can handle more traffic. The big problem you have with the new bridge going over the Columbia really had more to do with the bottleneck, particularly on the Oregon side, where great, you get a better bridge, bigger bridge, which we need, and newer bridge that's actually stronger and hopefully more sound going over the Columbia River, and then you run into this Rose quarter bottleneck. I might be saying that wrong. On the Portland side, where you're just going to get traffic jams over there. I still think getting a good bridge in is important. Integrating it into light rail is stupid. Light rail is a disaster. It's a squandering of the resources and the life energy of everybody involved in it. Nobody wants to read it or ride on it or use it or need it, and I think it's a terrible idea. And we should not bring the useless light rail project, the disaster in Portland, and bring it in, import it into our side of the state. It can stay on that side of the river. We don't need it on our side. Will electric ferries prevent climate change? Yeah, no. That's just stupid. And the funny thing is, this is actually kind of funny. Ferguson, who's a crazy, corrupt guy and totally dishonest and one of the worst people I could ever imagine running for office, you see him taking these different positions from others on his side in an effort to try to pretend like he's not as crazy as he really is. One of the things that he did is he said he didn't want electric ferries. He wanted to buy ferries that actually work. Because right now, electric ferries don't work. We don't even know that they can make them. They've not delivered them. They're a lot more expensive. If you like getting stranded out in the middle of the ocean in Puget Sound, then I guess you're going to enjoy the electric ferries. But short of that, it seems like kind of a stupid virtue signaling process. When it makes sense, it'll make sense. You can't force it on people. So anyway, but we'll see. So will electric ferries prevent climate change? Nope, and they're a dumb idea. And surprisingly, Ferguson agrees with me. So I guess we found common ground somewhere. This isn't a question. This is a breaking news update from the 2024 election. I don't know what is. If you're talking about Trump's, from the previous question, if you're talking about Trump's felony conviction thing, that's old news right now, and everybody's talking about it. Michelle Andrews, are there polls that we can look at for elections beside the Elway poll, which is a pretty decent one, I think, but are there others? There have been others, polls that are taken. The hard part with polling, and I'm super skeptical of polling. I mean, there's a ton of issues that I see with polling and not being accurate most of the time. And one of the biggest problems with polling, of course, is the methodology you use when you're collecting the data set, and also the significance of the data that you're collecting, right? It's just, taking a 500-person sample poll and then claiming that it's going to relate to how 4 million people are going to vote in the state is challenging. And one of the problems with polling, of course, is that a lot of people won't do polls anymore. So how do you get a reasonably accurate assessment of what the polling is? I understand all the different ways you can use to try to skew the data and control for variations and problems. But there are polls that are done. You only see some that are publicized. What you don't see are a lot of the polls that are done for campaigns by outside groups. And the left is particularly good at doing this. The more conservative side doesn't do nearly as many. The left will do tons of polls, detailed, micro-targeted polls, all different groups. It's not reported in the campaigns because the campaigns are rarely doing them. They're usually funded by these other groups that are doing them. And if they don't like the results, they'll never publicize them, but they will use those results to modify the campaign strategies. And a lot of times you're going to see that they're doing polling that indicates they're in trouble, and you aren't seeing it because they're publishing the polls. You're seeing it because they're trying to make some big changes that are like 180-degree turns on some of these campaigns, and you're wondering, why are they doing this? Well, it's because they're doing polling all the time, and they're realizing they're in trouble, and that's what they're doing. They're shifting. Ferguson's doing that right now, where he realizes he's in trouble on public safety, and so he's trying to pretend suddenly that he's a born-again crime fighter, when in fact he spent 12 years doing everything he could to make us less safe. So that's the kind of thing. You see that when you see the results. So, but there are a number of other polls out there that have been published. Some of them are probably pretty good. The ones that don't get published are interesting too, but everything's going to be biased. Alex Brown, what do you see the main differences are between a Byrd voter and a Reichert voter? The main difference is probably, remember, again, as I have commented before, Byrd did the right thing by jumping in the race early and getting started early. It just makes your campaign a little bit easier. You're more likely to reach a lot of grassroots people that way and establish a solid base. And he's done a really good job traveling around the state, being in all these different events. I have seen him at events now for 2 years, all over the place. I saw him. I don't remember the first event was that we met and actually talked, but he's been going around for a long time, 2 years or so. I think I'd seen him before then when he was on the Richland School Board, and we were aligned in his fight against the stupid masking issues out there. But you're probably getting the differences. The voter differences are probably not as big as people think. The people who comment on Facebook or attack each other on Facebook are a very small sampling of the average voter for either candidate, the truth be told. And so you're probably getting a little bit more conservative, Trump-oriented supporter that's probably voting for Byrd at this point in time, and you're probably getting a more traditional Republican at this point in time voting for Reichert, or somebody that's known him from his time, especially as King County Sheriff. And so there's not a big difference between those voters. There isn't. As much as you wanted to pretend like there is right now, there really isn't at the end of the day. They generally, if you were to take them and sit down on a take 100-question tests on what do you think about policy-wise, you'd find very little differences. So, that's how it is. Brandon, yes, he did have a DD-214 on his website, but there's actually quite a few of them. Apparently, the military issues different ones for different times when you're in different positions and different assignments. So I would try to put them all out if I was him. Putting the one up that he did is good. I totally agree with this. This is long before Byrd ever got into politics, right? This issue has come up before with other elected officials. Please understand this. This is not even the 50th time that this has happened. This is like the 100th time that people have had issues where it's helpful if they just put the stuff out there and get ahead of it. And the more I think Byrd does that, the better off he is as a candidate. Let's see. Let's go up here. Wow. Okay, guys, there's so many questions. I'm going to have to just keep skimming down this as best I can. A lot of people are taking their questions down. I don't know why. John Cook, my wife says she won't vote for Byrd or for Reichert because of the things they have done. What about encouraging her to vote for Mullet to avoid Sideshow Bob getting in? Well, you can, but I mean, it doesn't really matter in the primary. If you're going to vote for a Republican in the primary and you say, well, because of that, I'm going to vote for Mullet, that's not going to take anything away from Ferguson. It just simply waters down one of the Republicans. I would say if she's interested in voting for Republicans and she's pissed about the two of them, pick the one you like the least, and or you don't like, or you like the best of the two, despite the infighting drama back and forth, and then go with that. The good comment here, DD 214 is a statement of service for a specified period issued each time you reenlist or extend service. Performance evaluations are written annually and each time you transfer in the military. Yeah, and so that's why if I had a military background and I was running for office, I just put out all my DD 214 reports and just have it ahead of time, just like I'd put up my transcript or at least the diploma, right, from the college that I said I went to. It just eliminates all these issues. I don't know if I'd ever run for office again, but if I did, I'd probably just put up a bunch of the newspaper articles from the time I was at Columbia. Yeah, you'd doubt I went there, but here's all the articles somehow that I was in all their papers. Doesn't mean you're going to like me better. A leftist wouldn't like me, but at least it shows I was there, right? And so just different things like that. I think that's important. Let's see. John Jacobson, thanks for being a voice for conservatives in this critical time. Mention Brandy and Nicole and Jason Rance, all hands on deck. Listen, both Brandy and Jason and Ari Hoffman as well and other people, we need lots of different voices out there, a lot of different people doing different things. I don't view really anybody on the conservative side as a competitor. I just view them all as allies with whom sometimes we have disagreements. They're going to disagree with me. I'm going to disagree with them. It doesn't make us enemies, and I don't expect a purity test. I work with people who I believe are trying to help push the freedom and liberty agenda at all times, or at least more in that direction than not. I don't expect that I have to agree with everybody, and I don't expect a purity test, and I think people who do are not really doing a good job. How do we win with all the fraud? And that's a great point. We have to keep grinding away despite it, but I'd like to be fixing it. And fixing the fraud is a very challenging, time-consuming process. I've been involved in it a lot. I doubt there's many people in the state that have done more, been involved in more of trying to fix it. And it is a challenging process. It's not always fraud. Sometimes it's process problems. There's all kinds of other ways of solving this. And what you think is the problem is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to deal with. That being said, there are overwhelming trends and changes and that happen, and it just keeps grinding away. So cracking up, presenting facts against falsehood. That's what a good debate is. I'd love to see a good debate. But anyway, here's a Brian B. Yep, don't forget to like this video. Please do. Let's see. Keith Brown, Glenn, how do we get the issue of Inslee-Ferguson moving sex offenders from McNeil Island into our neighborhoods as a campaign issue? It seems like a topic that Reichert could use to help him win. Frankly, anybody running against the Ferguson should be able to use that as a topic to help them win. And I think you just got to keep talking about it, I'm assuming that what you meant here is me. When are Washington rhinos going to stop surrendering cycles? People are always going to keep fighting, and it's not just because of Republican name only, which would be the more mainstream sort of folk. I see it in both sides, and I tend to view myself as a much more conservative guy, more libertarian and conservative oriented. And so when I have policy disagreements, I'm usually not in alignment with what people would call mainstream Republicans. That's where I have most of my policy fights. If I was to sit down and have a fight on a policy issue, that's where I would be at. Usually it's not so much on the conservative side. What I don't like is both camps have groups of people in them right now. Some of these are my friends, both sides actually, which is kind of odd to observe this, who functionally seem completely incapable of fighting the left and can only fight each other. They seem to be totally unable to fight the left. I don't know why. I don't know why they seem to have that blind spot. I think you're going to find if you fight the left, the real origin of the destruction of our freedom and liberty in the state, you're going to find that you come together more, even though you'll have disagreements still. That's not going to change, but just please work on that, fighting the left. I think it's important. Do you have any plans to add or donate or super chat capability to your videos, similar to the Brandy Cruz show? I would donate during your videos with capability being available. Well, thank you for that suggestion. I haven't thought of that so much yet, but I might do that at some point in time. Let's see. It's not okay. Conservative thinking mom. As I remember, Dave Reichert is sort of a rhino. I'm not thrilled about Semi Bird, but do we really want a rhino in Reichert? At this point in time, I'm just trying to. I think the way to look at some of this is that my experience with sometimes when you flip or change states, what I've seen in other states and what I've seen in other counties and in certain legislative positions as well, is that you'll start the trend for change with something. Somebody has to be the right person at the right time. You can wait for perfection and you're going to die generations down the road wondering why you never got the perfect candidate, because they don't exist. So you take who happens to come through the scrum and come through the battle, and then you hopefully have some influence over them to shift them into doing the right thing when they get into office. And it's not about wanting somebody who's exactly aligned with you or not. It's about, these are the people who ran. The only person who's going to agree with you all the time is a guy looking in the mirror, and maybe not even then. So you find, paths to work with people who you can agree with on 80, 85% of the issues most of the time. And the other 15%, you can argue about that later, but try to stay focused on the people who basically hate you, like Ferguson, who's going to do everything in his power to destroy you and the freedoms and the liberties that you have left, who's aligned with the worst elements that we've ever been able to put together in the state. Why would you do anything to help that guy get into office? So anyway, that's kind of the thing I'd be working on, more than trying to worry about whether they're a rhino or too conservative or whatever. Both people who are in both camps, who view themselves as, both of them had the same problem. That's what's frustrating to observe here. Gary Edwards, small farms in Washington are disappearing at an alarming rate. What can be done? Well, number one, let's get rid of some of the ridiculous and absurd regulations and rules that are used and weaponized by the Department of Ecology or Fish and Wildlife or the Central Plan departments to destroy farming. And it's a war on farming. It's clearly there. They've aligned themselves with the big corporate farms. They implement policies that purposely and willfully destroy and harm home ownership, property ownership, and small farms. And we got to focus on getting rid of those. We the Governed, this didn't pull up with an at because you misspelled it there. With so many Republicans, this is Shaded Muse, running for Congress to replace Kathy McMorris Rogers, will we get 2 Democrats in the general election? And the answer to that is maybe. That's a fiasco in the 5th Congressional District, which is the Eastern Washington Congressional District. Way too many Republicans with big egos and no plans all jumped in at the same time, and I'm not sure who's going to come out of that scrum. But it's a mess out there, and that's a real risky race. It's actually probably one of the riskier races right now, because there's too many Republicans. There was like 7 or 8, I think, that came through, but 10, it was ridiculous. So anyway, Gary Edwards, you support housing first policies. It depends on what you mean by this, because housing first policies, the way they've been interpreted lately, has been that they're encouraging and supporting drug addiction with no accountability, and they want to put more drug addicts out on the street. But they're going to put them inside so they can keep the mess off the street and put them inside houses where they're going to destroy them, or apartments or whatever they're renting them. One of the most costly and pointless programs I've seen out there. And so I don't support that. I do support making home ownership much simpler and easier and lower the cost to do it. But you're going to have to do that by, number one, making it easier to build, making it less expensive to build. You're going to have to downsize and eliminate a lot of stupid, dumb policies and programs that are designed exclusively just simply to support a bureaucracy and jack up the cost of living. It's totally unnecessary. And most of the costs, huge chunks of the cost, right? I think the average home in Washington is $150,000 of just permitting costs associated with it. And all these things basically reduce the ability of most people to afford homes, and that's not a good thing. Shaded Muse, again, spelling here, but and will this make the Republicans dump the top 2 jungle primary and go to a closed system? Well, the Republicans aren't going to have any control over the top 2 jungle primary because they surrendered that control a while ago when it got implemented in the first place. Republicans did oppose that for about a decade after it was originally pushed. But after the 2004 election and after we lost, the perception was that the Republicans lost their Senate seat, federal Senate seat, because libertarians took just enough votes, and that they felt like most of those libertarians would have voted Republican given the choice. And so they kind of convinced some of the Republican insiders to surrender the top two, or surrender and go to this top two jungle primary system. And so even if the Republicans say they don't like it, and I think generally they don't, they're going to need to have some Democrats go along with them. Gary Edwards, should panhandling be stopped to prevent supporting addicts and drug dealers? Good question. I'm generally not in the favor of encouraging government abuse on activity, right, of people who are out there doing things. But I think you could discourage it, certainly not have it at freeways where I think it's a safety issue. And I think that's definitely a problem. So anyway, that's whether you restrict it specifically or not, you're going to have no camping, no assaults, no craziness. I don't think you can totally eliminate panhandling because I think that the law that you'd have to use to implement that is unconstitutional and unenforceable. That's just my opinion. But whatever you can do to eliminate the living situation where they dump garbage or they're, make them pay a price for poor behavior. What's with Brandy Cruz and that other guy smearing Semi? I'm not sure who the other guy is. Sounds like it's paid for by Ferguson or Reichert. I think you're going to find that it's not paid for by Ferguson. I think he's sitting back and laughing at the Republicans attacking each other. But frankly, I doubt Ferguson cares that much about it. At this point in time, Ferguson views himself as a front runner, and the rest of us are peons down here. He's worried about Reichert, so he's going to attack Reichert. And you don't have to believe me. Listen to him. He's going to attack Reichert because he's done it many times. And I'd like to say I think the Reichert campaign would be organized or capable enough to do stuff do research on Semibird, but I don't think they really are. I think that you're looking at information that's provided to Brandy Cruz, and I'm assuming Jason Rance is who you're talking about. And they're going public with anything that they think they've been able to document. And frankly, that's what media guys can do. But anyway, so I think that's just going to be what happens. It doesn't mean that there's another campaign. Usually campaigns are not as capable as you think. There we go. 2 questions. Thunderstriker, I found one of your questions there finally. What are the underlying causes of gun violence and how can we address them? Number 2, how can we address the social determinants of health that contribute to gun violence? Well, a lot of this comes down to, frankly, James Q. Wilson's study that's been around for a long time. Gun violence is not the issue. It's violence in general. It's crime in general. What do you do to reduce crime? And it's a great question. And it's one that's been around for a while, that's been solved multiple times. The left hates the solution, which is why every time it gets solved and we have massive drops in crime, you see the left try to come back and change the policies so that we have an increase in crime every single time. We've gone through this cycle now before. So if you have prolific criminals, you put them in prison and you keep them off the street, and that's how you reduce crime. That's a fact. It's worked every time it's tried. It'll work every time it's tried in the future. And it's worked every time it's tried in the past. Even weirdly enough, El Salvador, which had this kind of lawless disaster zone. I mean, it's a more extreme example, but they clearly took their criminal class and just stuck them in prison. I've never seen anything like that overt of a case in a small country like that. I suppose they can get away with doing something like that. It raises other questions about constitutionality and protection, but again, they don't have the same kind of constitutional protections we have here. I don't expect that we would implement the same kind of policies, but I can tell you, I personally witnessed New York City change dramatically overnight, and violence across the spectrum, whether it's gun violence or whether it's just violence in general, you take bad guys who are prolific offenders, who will continue to commit crimes, who commit the majority of crimes, and you put them away. And you don't put them away because of punishment. You're putting them away to protect the rest of us. At some point in time, that's a valuable policy. It's a cost-effective policy, and it makes life better for everybody. There's far fewer people killed, murdered, or victimized by raped or whatever, and that's what you have to do. So anyway. Let's see. I've got a couple more. What's my time here? Guys, sorry, I'm running way later than I thought I'd be. With this, I got caught up in answering questions. That's okay. You had a lot of good questions. And What we will try to do is I'll try to do a better job answering these questions a little bit faster next time. There were a lot more I couldn't get to. I realized there were. Ask them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to do my best to answer them. Sorry, guys, we were running a lot longer than I had realized here. I usually try to keep us around an hour, and we're actually getting closer to about an hour and a half. So with that, I'm going to close today's live stream. Look forward to seeing you next week. Look at my 2 videos that'll be coming out here. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week at Tuesday.